Scoobtober, Scooby-Doo.
Hey, welcome back to Scoobtober on Scoobtopia. And some of this month-long holiday celebration, I've been watching the last handful of direct-to-video Scooby movies I haven't seen yet to finally finish them off after I stopped watching around the WWE movies for a while. I got those wrestling movies out of the way already if you haven't seen, so now we're on to the ones I'm really interested in seeing, and these next two come back-to-back right after that first one. Today, we're looking at the 23rd DTV movie, Scooby-Doo Frankencreepy, released on Blu-ray and DVD August 19th, 2014. I actually almost talked about this movie last year when covering the Mamba Wamba episode in one of my favorite videos, but it didn't work out, so I'm finally getting to see this one now. Written by Jim Krieg, perhaps an infamous name on the channel to people, this is one that has been surrounded by controversy of many kinds, from sexualizing Velma to the fat phobia incident with Daphne that I remember making it go viral as parents were outraged back a decade ago. So I guess I'll have to see for myself what exactly this movie has going on. It's also clearly very inspired by Frankenstein, the Mary Shelley novel and its adaptations and influences, and I did recently read that classic piece of literature last year, which is pretty handy. One thing I take issue with right off the bat is the name, Frankencreepy, a reference to the Frankencreep of the film, which is just kind of odd. Because it's a nonsense word to describe the creature, in other countries it's titled some variation of Frankenmonster, or Curse of Frankenstein, or even Adventures in Transylvania in one place, and I feel like those are better titles, but maybe it's just me. With much more to say during the next segment, let's get into the actual film, which is much more appropriate for the Halloween season. Movies often do a copyright-free parody of Google, but Scooby-Doo might be the stupidest, silliest one I've seen. And it's the very first thing we see as the movie opens, dropping us in without so much as a Warner Brothers logo. Then we get Daphne's little website, and it's so overwhelming, actually, but I love it. We get a reference to Alex Super from the Mamba Wamba episode and the username of one of her commenters as well, who confirms the band broke up, as I covered in the video on that episode. Fred even pops into video chat and discussed the episode, and one of the villains of the episode, Lila. And if you haven't seen that video, definitely go check it out after this. Shaggy pops in to discuss Creeps and Crawls, the Green Phantoms, after that, before Velma pops in to also recap old Iron Face's episode. And I can't help but notice Velma has really changed up her hair here, but I like it. We recap Redbeard's ghost as well, and obviously we are recapping these episodes for a reason. Someone else calls in named Cuthbert Crawley, looking an awful lot like Cuthbert Crawls without much to change his appearance, saying he's Velma's family lawyer. I assume Velma is so flustered and focused on not discussing her family that it keeps her from noticing this. Things start going by so fast, I got a little whiplash, but Fred won't listen to her protests and decides they need a road trip to go talk to the lawyer, speeding them right over and obsessively cleaning even fingerprints off the van as he makes love to it. Crawley informs Velma she's the sole beneficiary of her great-great-uncle Baron Basil's estate, the name likely being a reference to Basil Rathbone, who portrayed Baron Wolf von Frankenstein in 1939's Son of Frankenstein, and this situation itself also being a reference to that film. This means she inherited the castle in Transylvania, but thankfully for the boys, not that one, the one in Pennsylvania. The horror is Daphne's now, though, upon hearing the people there living 19th century lifestyle. And again, the editing and pacing of this is just giving me major whiplash, but it's making me laugh too because of how weird it is. Someone messes with the van while Velma says she wants nothing to do with Basil, Crawley mentioning the supernatural curse on the estate. Cut to more whiplash as they leave. I really do like the art style of this one. It's kind of unique and not like the other movies of this era at all, which is unusual. Fred notices the beeping from the bomb planted in the van and has them duck to avoid the explosion. Someone with a mask that looks like Iron Face's mask laughing above as we get the credits. I love the vibes so much better and stylized than what the WWE ones had, setting up echoes of people calling the gang meddling kids after being caught and the gang snooping around. I also love the stylized art of the gang in this as well, the visuals giving all kinds of foreshadowing as to what will be happening in this film. Back to the story, Fred tears up as the miscreant vanishes, Crawley saying that was the ghost of the Baron, and the remainder of the explosion writes to stay away from Transylvania. Fred is so distraught over the loss of his baby, though, that nothing can stop him now from going to check this place out.
The Transylvania Express!
Again, oh my god, the editing and pacing is insane on this. They bore the Transylvania Express and oh my god, the editing is just going to happen the whole movie, isn't it? Daphne checks out a teen mystery solver gossip website, which exists for some reason apparently, and there's something about Velma.
What blue-spectacled teen super sleuth is hiding a terrible family secret? Hint, she wears orange knee socks every day.
Velma, That's you.
Like, damn, they got her. Her secret out, Velma comes clean to her friends about why she's so obsessed with debunking the supernatural. Ashamed of her family secret, she explains her family's name was Americanized when they arrived at Ellis Island, changing it from von Dinkenstein to Dinkley, meaning she is the direct descendant of the infamous Dr. von Dinkenstein. He supposedly created a monster, which Velma says is what inspired Mary Shelley to write her novel Frankenstein based upon her relative, which has weighed upon their family. The desire to finish what he could not made some of them go mad, trying to create a monster themselves. Such was the case of Basil, who reclaimed their name. Daphne are busy on their phones looking this up, all of this already on the internet to Velma's defeated shock. Basically, she wants to debunk real monsters and ghosts to reverse her bad family karma. Suddenly, the train speeds up so fast that they'll probably be thrown to the depths below, several of the cars already flying off the tracks. The gang run to the other cars with some interesting-looking people to save them, and when Shaggy gets to the front, he finds the Baron is driving this madness. The fire on the train continuing to spread, Daphne gets a cheerleading idea that allows them to balance them enough to make it to a point where they can just disconnect themselves, the rest crashing into fire. The townspeople are angry at their train and clock being destroyed, but Velma tries to point out they just saved lives. This, however, leads to her being recognized, being told she and her family are not welcome here.
Was your uncle's monster did this to me?
Why did the monster replace your hand with a duster?
The monster took my hand.
This inspector, by the way, is another reference to the son of Frankenstein, specifically Lionel Atwill's similar character who is missing his arm. Everyone confirms they blame her entire bloodline for the curse, including the mayor, who says their town has been ruined from the lack of tourism and everything else caused by it. Their main factory, which manufactures torches, even shutting down. A smaller man tells them to follow, and looking at the demonstration of the torches, they decide to take their chances with him. Whiplash editing into his carriage, he explains his name is Iago, and all of the von Dinkensteins have a hunchback servant. Iago being mostly and inconsistently pronounced as Iago is likely a reference to Mel Brooks' 1974 classic Young Frankenstein, combined with the character obviously being an amalgam of Fritz from the 1931 Frankenstein and Igor from Son of Frankenstein. Fred asks why the Baron wears the mask, and Iago tells the story of the stormy night he began his experiment, having been collecting parts from the cemetery, the harbor, and other sus areas for months, attempting to bring life to a creation. But the townspeople caught wind of this and brought out their torches, chasing he and his monster to an old windmill that they set on fire, possibly killing the monster and disfiguring the Baron, which is obviously much identical to the iconic end of the 1931 Frankenstein film's climax. Before he died years later, wearing the mask to hide his scarred face, he cursed the town. Velma notes Iago suddenly speaking more normally instead of broken English and grunts, and they reach the castle as a silhouette watches their arrival. Shaggy comes face to face with Mrs. Vanders, who is a reference to Frau Blücher from Young Frankenstein, opening the door much the same way as her introduction. She locks them in and drops the only key down her dress, which clanks downward loudly for an ungodly amount of time until splashing. They share introductions and she shows them to their rooms, her feet making a squishing sound with every step until she bends over and it continues despite stopping. The gang realizing she's farting. When she says they have all the natural gas they need, Shaggy agrees with a giggle and she farts again, so yeah, we're in potty humor territory. There's a classic painting watching them pass moment, followed by a classic ghost organ scare, and they enter the laboratory. The boys mistaking dug up parts for food. Mrs. Vanders reveals their table is actually the frozen monster, or Frankencreepy himself, an homage to 1943's Frankenstein meets the Wolfman.
Just to clarify, Frankenstein was the doctor, not the monster.
Velma has a crisis trying to say it can't be real, so she locks in and says she's going to prove it by recreating the experiments from following the notes. While hoping to vindicate herself, Daphne points out this is how she said her other relatives were driven to madness, but Velma insists she's not obsessed and doing the opposite of what they did. She rushes everyone but Iago out and is impressed by the equipment, specifically the Strickfaden electro wheel. This is a reference to Kenneth Strickfaden, who made all the electrical equipment for the original Universal Frankenstein films this has been so heavily referencing. He notably never received credit for his groundbreaking electrical effects until Mel Brooks borrowed the original Frankenstein equipment for Young Frankenstein, so this little shout out is much warranted. Mrs. Vanders makes sure Velma looks close enough at the equipment to become hypnotized, while the others become hungry and get offered food by her. Daphne even mentions being allergic to shellfish, which aligns with her allergy to seafood in Mystery Incorporated. Fred continues to be devastated with losing the van when remembering they can't drive to the festival tonight, but Daphne says walking will leave a smaller carbon footprint.
Not with Scooby's paws, we won't.
Turns out it's a torch festival, empty because of the Dinkenstein curse, and they clearly are not welcome. The boys do win everyone over though with being able to eat just like they do. Here's where we get to the start of what caused the controversy a decade ago. Daphne asks to see if this dress is in a size 2, and this suspicious woman tells her she's at least a size 8. She tries the dress on in that size, and it does indeed fit. Her hair is suddenly messy as well, which starts sending her into a spiral. The boys meanwhile are celebrated and given traditional clothes as a prize for the food eating contest, followed by another insane transition that Fred is still having an impossible time with the grief, walking off in tears. The boys are then given the biggest prize, which must be eaten immediately, but the boys for once aren't hungry, and we literally see hell freeze over, pigs fly, the fat lady singing, all that jazz, which pisses off the mayor. The crowd with their torches turn on them as they bump into Fred, then Daphne, who doesn't want Fred to see her. Shaggy compliments the torches staying lit even in the rain, and Iago pulls up saying they need to save Velma, who's gone mad, so they rush back and try to get into the lab door. Finally unlocked, she's serving some Morticia Addams realness with a new hairdo inspired by 1935's titular Bride of Frankenstein. Rather than debunking the monster, she's now convinced he was a genius and that this creature will live, saying this is science, but the townspeople are banging on the door with their torches to begin ramming the door as classic mobs do, so she puts the process in motion, and with a flash, they find the monster defrosted, prompting Velma to quote Victor Frankenstein from the 1931 film.
Alive! It's alive! Alive! It's alive? Really?
For once, the boys aren't afraid and just walk up to the thing, only gagged by its smell. But then it sees itself, becomes horrified, and starts wrecking everything, even freezing the torches and scaring off the townspeople. Then Velma finally sees Daphne and she catches her reflection, another part parents were not happy with.
I'm hideous! No, you're beautiful. Really? No.
Fred says he can't track monsters without the van, but the boys offer to do it for Velma instead, even turning down the need for Scooby snacks and raw dogging it. In probably the most controversial scene, Daphne is surrounded by mirrors, having to see herself not be skinny as she screams in horror, the Baron appearing to say this is how she's been affected by his curse. In further distress, she smashes a mirror just to find a secret tunnel, so she checks it out. Off elsewhere, the boys are unafraid as they find the Frankencreepy, leading into a big chase song which is apparently a big deal because it's the first with lyrics since Samurai Sword. I love the art style it switches to here, but it is a bit random and unusual. They finally reunite with a menacing Velma. Fred realizes he's surrounded by potentially useful items, while Daphne finds some mining equipment that seems pretty recent, only for the Baron to appear. Fred hears her scream and starts to move, while the boys wake up restrained next to the creature, Velma explaining the monster's brain must be defective and she needs to replace it with a better one, needing both of them for this as the two of them together almost have one entire brain when combined. This is a reference to 1942's The Ghost of Frankenstein. The monster tears off their outfits, and suddenly they're hungry again, and it turns out, even scared again. Daphne continues to be chased by the Baron, effortlessly floating and bouncing around like a balloon, when Fred shows up to fight, the Baron using Fred's weakness about the van to knock him down. Daph tells him not to do it for her though, do it for the van, and he's back in the game, pinning the Baron who runs off. Daph comments about her being damaged and awful looking, again, something parents were not happy with, nor should they be, but Fred says he didn't even notice. The sweet moment is a little sour though, with adding in this bit of him struggling to wrap his arms around her, which is a little weird and unnecessary. She then realizes the Baron's cape is synthetic when it should be real silk, but everything starts to collapse on them before they can think too much. Back in the lab, Velma prepares to saw out the brains, while Fred and Daph find themselves trapped, Fred losing consciousness from lack of air. The boys eat through their restraints and run, so Velma sends the monster after them, but hits a lever on the way out, reactivating the hypnosis device in front of her. Daphne cuts herself tunneling out, only to realize it didn't hurt, and air starts spewing out, the dress actually being a bodysuit. Still kind of a problem for parents. She celebrates still being skinny after all, but also having fresh air again, and starts using mouth-to-mouth to help Fred. The boys barricade themselves in and relax, just to realize they didn't lock the door, which the monster walks right through. They escape through a tunnel and run right into the others, happy to reunite.
Come with me if you want to live.
Iago shows up as well, warning of a gas leakage, Fred realizing it's why he passed out so fast, but also that it's explosive and they need to get out. Fred calls for something, and Velma apologizes and says she believes she was hypnotized, so the boys forgive her with a hug. Fred's ride arrives, having beefed up the carriage to be a new mystery machine, so they dash out while everything crumbles, Fred assuring Velma he's fine now as the original van lives in his heart. Unfortunately, with so many fiery items, everything starts exploding as well, blowing up as the town townspeople watch, Velma's lone glasses flying out. No grief though. It's party time because the curse is over. There's even a barrel of root beer labeled Schwanzigers, the same brand of root beer in Young Frankenstein. As these four celebrate, the inspector later that night is haunted by the curse left by Fred's ghost. The woman who sold the dress to Daphne is haunted by her. The mayor is visited by Velma's ghostly head, and Mrs. Vanders encounters the spirits of the boys. The four run into each other surrounded by the spirits, running on the train as the conductor reveals himself to be Fred. The train leaves, but without their car as they're locked in. The still very alive gang stepping out. They just used some wires, lights, and trickery to make the ghosts come to unlife, and then the monster also reveals itself to not be real, but Iago, who also is actually a special FBI agent in disguise. One of their models was stolen and he traced it to here while undercover, revealing the mayor was the one pretending to be the monster that had been using it. Shaggy points out he was there when they were attacked by it, but Velma reveals someone else was using it then. An entire conspiracy behind this case, which is why Velma was hypnotized so she wouldn't sniff it out. They also wonder why the clothes made the boys brave, and how Daphne ended up in an inflatable suit. Velma explains Fred was right when he said it was personal after the van was killed, because it was personal this time, a personal attack on them. The inspector is really Crawley, who really is Crawls of the Green Ghosts. Doesn't answer the mystery of why they didn't recognize him, but he was there to lure them into the trap. Fred was the first victim with the van, then Daphne with the suit losing her skinniness, then the boys in their own suits rigged with acupuncture needles inside that suppressed hunger and introduced false courage. While Velma was then hypnotized, the conspirators became the creature. Fred wonders what treasure they were protecting, but Velma explains it wasn't money this time, they wanted them. As Daphne says they don't even know them. Velma reveals the mayor to be C.L. Magnus, aka Redbeard. The G slur is actually Lila from the Mamba Wamba incident, which yeah, she just had a headband on, how didn't you see that one either? And Mrs. Vanders is
Mama Mione,
aka Iron Face. Daphne finally recognizing the recycled mask. In prison, they joined an anti-Scooby social network, a whole website dedicated to wishing revenge against the gang. They found out about Velma's family, bought the castle, discovered the natural gas, everything falling into place. Velma then asks why they didn't just sell the place when they discovered the gas, which would have made them incredibly rich, and apparently they did not consider this. The townspeople now celebrate the gang as they prepare to leave, especially with Velma having given them the rights to the natural gas as an apology for her ancestors. Before they get in their carriage, the FBI have a surprise, a newly restored mystery machine, which Fred is ecstatic over. On the way, Daphne asks how Velma knew the curse was fake, and she says the superficial things they lost weren't what they loved the most, like it said. They love each other the most. While the boys decide to be brave now that they've tried it, Fred notices a new button added by the FBI, which ends up sending them flying through the air. During the credits, the nerd from before asks about Shaggy having no clothes one moment and having them on the next, out of nowhere, or the clock tower being destroyed but appearing fine later, or the train engine being destroyed only to also be fine later. But the FBI raid his house before he can bug out about continuity errors any further. We also get one last fart joke. And that's apparently Scooby-Doo Frankencreepy. It's definitely interesting. I guess I can see what all the fuss was about back in the olden days when this came out. Getting it out of the way, yes, Daphne's arc being that she's terrified of not being skinny kind of sucks. There's so much more you could do with her beyond making her superficial. Though I guess I get it if we're only sticking to Where Are You lore. They do try to make it better by saying friendship is what really matters, I guess. I'm not gonna defend fat phobia. I didn't enjoy it, it's pretty terrible. I guess I'm not surprised parents complained about Velma being too sexy. She does have her chi-chis out more than usual and a little tummy showing, but I never would have noticed or thought anything of it, so I don't really get that. Maybe that's just me though. Velma has a pretty interesting arc. We do have to create a family tree backstory for her the way we've seen for others like Shaggy in these to make it happen, but I guess it makes sense. I don't really love it that much. I prefer Velma to just be a sassy deadpan cynic like in the original rather than trying to secretly run from her family's karma. It makes it a little too complicated for me to want to consider this canon outside of this movie. I loved getting to hear Mindy Cohn as Velma in another movie I haven't seen yet, as she's easily my favorite modern voice of the character and I miss her dearly. She really gets to shine and show her range in the role in this one for obvious reasons. Fred is decently handled here. It's pretty in line with his van obsession these days and his behavior vaguely to explicitly on the spectrum depending on the project. This movie is very reminiscent of Mystery Incorporated where that was canon, so I wouldn't be shocked if he was here too. His interest in the van more than Daphne definitely carries over. The boys are used as effectively as they probably can be. Sometimes they can drag a movie down with too much or too little, but having them be brave for once gives them something new to experiment experiment with, not to mention how quickly it all goes by anyway. And boy does it go by. This movie is on an absolutely insane sugar high. This movie is cracked out. I don't know why or what's going on, but I had to take several breaks just to get my breath and parse the information being thrown at me. I got a little overwhelmed, genuinely. I don't know if I love it or hate it, because often it was funny, but it also makes it hard to follow sometimes, I don't know. Another unique charm here really is the animation, because obviously the movie for some reason does not at all look like the other DTV Scooby movies of this era. Velma's hair is styled with a little bit more of a cute curl, not unlike her hair with the bows in Mystery Incorporated again. Fred's design is a little more angular, reminiscent of that show as well. Even Daphne and Shaggy to me feel a little closer to those designs instead. They aren't necessarily closer to the original designs than any others, but there's just something I really enjoy with these randomly one-off designs. The animation of them itself is really nice and smooth as well. It's just a really good looking movie, and that's a reason to check it out if nothing else. I know I keep saying it, but even the background art feels ripped out of Mystery Incorporated a lot of the time. I kept feeling like I was watching that show. The comedy can be a little hit or miss. It's definitely not the comedy of the original series. Some of the jokes, including even from the quick pacing, are very funny and got some laughs out of me truly. But the movie also relies several times on potty humor, and I feel like that's just oddly juvenile for this franchise and even this movie, and very out of place. The twist of the returning villains is a little complicated, but I think the movie knows that, and randomly recapping their episodes at the start makes it kind of obvious, especially with Krawls not even really having a disguise as the lawyer. Lila also is kind of random, not to mention not really disguised either. Old Iron Face makes sense because that episode is iconic enough that Cyberchase used that villain, but Mamba Wamba isn't especially popular, let alone Lila, so she's kind of an oddball pick for a returning villain. Again, check out my video on that episode if you haven't. The movie definitely did at least a modicum of research on Frankenstein lore to stuff into this. If you're a lover of the novel by Shelley alone, there's not really too much of that here, but if you love the Universal horror interpretations, that's clearly the real inspo here. The direct quotes and pulls from scenarios, even Mrs. Vanders from parody Young Frankenstein, you're definitely getting a Frankenstein-type movie as advertised. It's not a boring movie, and I'm glad I saw it. I wish I had sooner. It's far from perfect, but it's not mind-numbing or difficult. I do think I would get tired of it though with the editing and pacing. It could be annoying at times, so I'm also sort of glad it's a weird one-off. Ultimately, I can see why someone would hate this, and I can see why someone would love it. It's for sure one of those. Glad to have completed one more of these last few I haven't seen yet. I think that's really all I have to say for this one, so I guess it's break time until the next Scoobtober celebration video. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss this month-long limited event and return to the channel before it's over. There's one more movie to watch and more to come. Like the video if you liked it, follow the Tumblr page and TikTok if you aren't watching this there, etc. Stay tuned for more Scoobtober. Bye!